My own sons pushed me away from my husband's casket, and I said thank you, not to them, but to myself, for finally hearing my own heart break and for stopping the pretense that this was love. The room smelled of lilies and boiled beef. I was wearing a black wool dress that tickled my neck, old shoes that rubbed my heels, and the freshwater pearl earrings he gave me for our 20th anniversary. I was smoothing a fold at my waist when Ilya leaned over and hissed, "Mom, that's enough. You've already said goodbye." His wife, Sveta, sneered, "People are watching." Artyom stood nearby like a guard of someone else's grief, while his wife, Yulia, was glued to her phone. I still raised my hand to touch the forehead of the man I had spent 44 years with. Ilya grabbed my wrist. The pain was sharp, childlike. They were taking me away from myself. I exhaled, adjusted the fur trim on our neighbor Margarita's coat, and whispered, "Let's go to the kitchen. I think the kettle needs me." In the kitchen, glasses clinked, and the air was thick with the scent of dill. In silence, I took a potato pie from the oven, cut into big squares just the way he liked it. Steam hit my face, and I was flooded with a memory. Last summer, he stroked my palm and said in a raspy voice, "Marina, if life goes sideways again, don't stay silent." Back then, I just laughed. I didn't laugh now. After the wake, in the empty apartment, I counted the glasses. 12. The broth was cooling on the stove. I took off my earrings and placed them in a saucer, and their thin chime seemed to ask, "Do you hear it?" I called Pavel, the notary and my husband's friend. "Let's set a time for the reading, as we agreed." He paused. "Be prepared." On the day of the will's reading, I wore a graphite suit. I put a folder and a linen napkin in my bag. It absorbs tears better than paper. The reception room smelled of polish and leather. Ilya and Artyom arrived with their wives, laughing softly as if at a corporate party. "Not this meeting is for the heirs," Ilya said, not even bothering to offer me a seat. I placed the napkin on my lap. Pavel opened the envelope Ilya had brought and began to read in a steady voice. I listened, counting my breaths to keep from breaking down. At the words "equally between the sons," I raised my hand. "Pavel, there will be an amendment." And I placed my folder on the table. His fingers twitched. My sons' faces went pale. Sveta gasped, "What is this?" "This is what your father-in-law and I arranged 3 months ago," I said, and unfolded the pages. The room became so quiet you could hear the clock ticking above the safe, and then, for the first time, I felt not just pain, but backbone. I was doing a good thing, protecting the will of the man I loved and protecting myself, the woman he had asked not to stay silent. In response, I heard Yulia whisper, "She's old. She won't be able to handle this." And Ilya scoffed, "Don't embarrass yourself." I remembered making them lumpy-free semolina porridge and mending their sneakers with a fishbone stitch. I'm not their oven. I'm a person. "Pavel, continue," I said, and while he read, my children tried to stare reality into submission. I sat up straight, as if my spine had turned to steel. I went out into the hall to get some air. The cold light of the fluorescent lamps made the walls look as flimsy as files in a folder. Yulia tiptoed after me. "Marina, you're a reasonable woman. Let's not make a scene. Just sign the power of attorney. The boys will take care of everything." I looked at her manicured nails and thought about how many times those same nails had ignored my calls, until they needed borscht and a babysitter for an hour. The restroom in the notary's office smelled of cheap lemon soap. I leaned my palms against the sink and turned on the icy water. In the mirror, my face had a fine web of wrinkles, and the pearl earrings glimmered dully. "Don't stay silent." His voice echoed in my memory. I dried my hands with a paper towel, carefully put it in my bag. It would come in handy. As I returned, I heard Ilya quietly explaining to Pavel, "Mom is just emotional. You understand. She's not in the right state to make decisions." I walked in calmly and sat down. "I'm in the state of being a person," I said, and for the first time that day, I felt my back straighten. After the reading, the three of us, my grown boys and I, drove to my place. They walked ahead without looking back, just like when they used to run to the swings as children, and I'd carry their mittens and a mandarin orange in my pocket. In the kitchen, I got out some green tea and set out 3 mugs. The sugar bowl with a chipped edge squeaked as I opened the lid. "We need you to sign an agreement for us to manage things," Artyom began. "It's just a formality, for your own peace of mind." He pulled a clean form from his folder, the place for my signature, whiter than the rest. I pushed the saucer with the lemon slices toward him. "First, tea." I poured it. The yellow slices floated like tiny suns. Ilya didn't touch his. "You don't want a scene, do you?" he said harshly. "The neighbors will find out everything and, well, you know how society is. It's better to handle things quietly." "Quiet is when you're thanked, not when you're pressured," I replied. I placed my palm on the table, right on the mark from an old burn. I got pulling a scalding baking sheet out for their favorite apple pie. "You didn't grow up in silence. You grew up in my noise, pots and pans, irons, homework, and nighttime fevers. Don't confuse my dignity with your convenience." They exchanged a look. Sveta, sitting by the door, yawned, pure boredom. "All right, Mom." Ilya's lips were tight. "We'll leave the papers. Think about it. We'll come back tomorrow." "Not tomorrow," I said. "When I call you." They got up. The tea was untouched and growing cold. When the door slammed shut, the apartment felt vast, like the empty interior of a car. I walked through the rooms. A cactus craft from their childhood was collecting dust by the window, and his cardigan hung on the back of a chair, smelling of tobacco and mint. I neatly folded the cardigan, closed the closet, and returned to the kitchen. A floorboard creaked under my foot, the same one he taught me to listen to the house on, where the floor sags, where the radiator grumbles, where the kettle sings. I took the linen napkin from my bag, unfolded it, and placed it on top of the form my children had left. I covered it, like covering a wound with clean cloth. My phone flashed. A message from my neighbor, Margarita. "If you need anything, knock. I have tea." And right after, one from my cousin Lita. A voice message on WhatsApp where between "stay strong" and "don't make things worse" came the hammered-out cold advice. Just accept it and move on. Men are like that. If he left it to them, he must have had a reason. I turned off the sound. I realized how many pieces of advice are actually about the silence you can conveniently use to hide other people's cowardice. I put the kettle on again for myself. I put 2 lemon slices in the mug, one for the 44 years, the second for who I am today. On the windowsill, between the jar of dill and an empty blue bottle, I noticed a tiny speck of light. The sun had broken through a cloud and rested on my sink. I smiled at that moment, tiny and entirely mine. Then I gathered my son's papers from the table, put them in the bottom drawer, and clicked the lock. On top of them, I placed his checkered notebook, open to a page with a shopping list: bread, milk, barrier gate, fix the doorbell. Next to it, a note in his handwriting: "Marina, don't forget about yourself." I traced my finger over those words, like a scar, and closed the notebook. The inhale, steady. The exhale, heavy, but it was mine. I took the earrings from the saucer and put them on again. In the mirror above the fridge, I saw a woman whose hands were trembling, yes, but whose gaze was steady. Pavel, I dialed the number. Please send me a copy of the text. I want to read it again, and can you tell me where I can get advice on— I hesitated. On boundaries. He chuckled softly into the phone. I know a lawyer, and a very good therapist. I'll send you their contacts. Send them, I said, and realized I was learning a new language, where help me doesn't mean I'm weak, but I'm alive. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the small nightlight on. The clock ticked, the tea in their mugs grew cold, and only my cup was empty. To the bottom. I ran my palm over the table, like a map of the future, and felt that the wood was warm. The house was with me, but I was no longer just a house for someone else. At night, my phone trembled on the nightstand like a fevered tooth. First, I got a message saying, "Mom, we're worried. You don't understand the consequences." Then a long text from Ilya with bullet points like a contract. 1. You withdraw your objections. 2. You sign the power of attorney. 3. We handle all the trouble. It ended with, "This is for your peace of mind." They had taught me to be silent for 44 years, all for my peace of mind. I turned off the sound and lay on my side. In the darkness, I could hear the old pipes in the wall whispering to each other, a familiar household choir. I dreamt that I was putting a hot baking sheet on the table again, but instead of apple pie, it held bare papers that burned me more than any apples ever could. Morning brought a new attack. In the family group chat, Sveta wrote, "Marina, we're all here for you, but it's best to trust professionals, us, now." Yulia attached a link to an article, How the Elderly Can Avoid Inheritance Mistakes, and added, "It's all simple and emotion-free." I saw a dozen silent views from their friends at the bottom. Our neighbor Margarita called, "Marin, hang in there. If you need anything, come over. I'll make you some coffee. Not that instant stuff, but the real deal." That promise of the real deal sounded like there were still meaningful words left in the world. I decided not to sit and wait. I called Pavel. He spoke calmly. "Don't sign anything without me, and don't be afraid of the word court. They often use it to scare you. We're on the right side of the law." His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't slept either. "And get your apartment documents ready," he added. "Even if you decide not to sell, putting things in order never hurts." Order was a word that smelled of old notebooks and mothballs, but this time it felt like a bulletproof vest. I drove to the local government services office. In line, people held folders, their faces raw from the January cold. The woman in front of me was sniffing smelling salts. All this red tape again. At the operator's desk, I laid out my title deeds, cadastral documents, and stamped papers. The operator, a girl with a red ponytail, said, "Everything's dirty, no one can do anything without you," and slammed her stamp down, as if making a final point for me. That period in me became a comma. In the evening, I stopped by to see my grandkids with gifts. Knitted hats with, poms. The stairwell smelled of chicken soup and wet boots. I rang for a long time. Yulia opened the door a crack, her eyelashes batting. "Marina, they're tired. School tomorrow. Let's do another time." I held out the bag. "We'll put it in the basket. Thanks." The door closed. A round, vacant nothing stared out from the peephole. I went down, leaning on the cold railing, and for the first time allowed myself to make a few sounds without words, dull thuds, like my heart beating against its cage. The next day, Ilya called, "We're coming over. We'll be there in 20 minutes. All 4 of them arrived, the 2 of them and their wives. They put a cake from the pastry shop on the table with the words family written neatly on it. "We want to do this peacefully," Artyom began, "without yelling or making a scene. You don't like scandals." I was pouring tea and thinking about how their peacefully always meant conveniently for us. Ilya took out a new form. "It's just a power of attorney to manage things. You don't understand any of this. We're your children." I could still hear his old mom in my head, but from his mouth it sounded like, "Sign this." "I'll get Pavel on a video call," I said, "and if he says yes, I'll sign." Sveta tapped the table with a fingernail. "Why do we need extra people? We're family." "Exactly why. There won't be any extra people here," I replied. "Only the necessary ones." They exchanged glances. Yulia tried to smile. "Marina, we love you." Love is an expensive word. It's often used to make cheap change. We parted in the cold hallway. "You're making everything complicated," Ilya threw at me. But I thought to myself, I'm finally making things truly simple. I'm saying no when I feel bad. A few days later, I checked into a small hotel downtown, very clean with white sheets and a neat "Do Not Disturb" sign. In the bathroom, the tile held warmth like a hand. I stood in the shower and counted each stream. 10 for the years I endured, 10 for the years I was silent, 10 for the years I had left. On the nightstand was a tea set, tea bags lined up like soldiers. I picked black tea and thought, I'm no longer a soldier. In the morning, the realtor came, a girl named Anya in a gray coat with a folder. "Marina, if you decide to sell, we already have interest." But she hesitated. "I was asked to tell you that your relatives are saying they'll contest everything. People are afraid of conflict." I felt my anger cool and turn into a calm resolve. "Thank you for being honest," I said. "The conclusion is simple. We won't lower the price, and all showings will be with me present." We took pictures of the rooms, the living room with the shadow of an old floor lamp, the kitchen with the kettle mark, the window sill with the jar of dill. Anya expertly moved chairs. I straightened the bedspread and suddenly caught my reflection in the mirror. A woman who was tidying up for herself, not for guests. The first couple of buyers came on Sunday. A young woman touched the wall by the window. "The wind sounds nice here." I smiled. The guy asked, "What are the neighbors like?" "Various," I said. "There's Margarita. She bakes khachapuri, and there are those who like to give advice." On the stairs, I ran into Ilya. He stood there like a gate. "What are you doing?" "Living," I replied. He left, muttering, "We'll see who wins in the end." "I will," the stair landing told me. Then came the shopping mall. I looked at a display of pearl necklaces and remembered when he gave me the earrings. "So you can be the sea, even when there's no sea." Yulia was talking loudly on the phone to someone about how old age is being stubborn. I bought a pair of earrings, and in that moment, I saw myself in the mirror, not as a mother, not as a widow, but as a woman with a slender neck and stubborn eyes. Yulia walked up to me, smiling sweetly. What a coincidence! And then my sons appeared. Our words chased each other and fought. Fairness, tradition, don't embarrass yourself, children, mom, power of attorney. People around us pretended to read price tags. A saleswoman was rearranging rings like chess pieces. "Do you want your share?" I asked evenly. "A fair share," Artyom said. "Fairness is when a mother isn't an ATM," I said, "and when saying goodbye at a funeral doesn't end with being forbidden to touch your husband's forehead." Someone started recording on their phone. Yulia hissed, "Turn it off." "Let it be," I said. "I'm tired of living in the dark." I left first. At the exit, the security guard, a strong man with graying temples, quietly said, "Hang in there, Mom." On my way home, I thought about how easily strangers can sometimes say "Mom" more gently than your own children. The video spread through group chats faster than news. Women started writing to me. "Thank you for saying that out loud." Others wrote, "Why are you airing your dirty laundry?" I only replied to the first group. "My sons moved to heavy artillery." A letter arrived from a lawyer I didn't know. "In connection with possible violations in the drafting of the will, we request—" I knew they were trying to force me to justify myself. I called Pavel. He sighed. "Standard threat. We'll reply. And remember, we have a no contest clause. If they risk it, they'll lose what they've already been given." His "we" was like a warm blanket. On the third day, Yulia took the grandkids to a playground near my house, knowing I'd walk by. "Say hi to Grandma," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The children rushed to me, and I hugged each one, feeling in every bone how much I needed this. And then Yulia leaned in. "If you love them, don't hurt us." Love as a lever. Crude mechanics. "I'm doing this for them, to learn to be myself," I replied. She flinched as if from boiling water. And then the past surfaced. San Sanich, my husband's old business partner, called. "Marina, I didn't want to get involved, but my conscience is bothering me. Artyom owes a lot of money. Your husband didn't want to expose him, so he gave him the money from his own accounts. But he asked that it be returned fairly. Artyom never paid it back." The ground under my feet had never been perfectly solid, but now I heard it ring hollowly with voids. I hadn't known this. "Thank you," I said. "I'll take it from here." I remembered how Artyom used to hide a bad grade behind his back as a child and say, "Don't tell Dad," and how I thought I was saving him, but in reality, I was digging the hole deeper. I asked everyone to meet at a cafe on the corner, neutral territory smelling of coffee and vanilla, with music pretending people were just enjoying the evening. All 4 of them came. I laid a piece of paper in front of them, not a form, just a simple white sheet. "Right," I said, "a plan to repay San Sanich, and a plan for how you will communicate with me without mentioning money in any way." Ilya laughed, a humorless laugh. "Who do you think you are to dictate terms to us?" "Mom," I replied. A pause. Artyom lowered his eyes. "I'll handle it myself." His jaw muscles clenched, like a man holding back a scream with his bare hands. "Handle it," I said, "but not with my strength." They left angry. I stayed alone, finished my bitter coffee, and wrote in a notebook, "Don't talk to them without witnesses. Don't open the door without calling Pavel. Check the banks." And I went to the bank. A neat manager, as precise as a check, verified everything. There have been attempts to set up online access with a power of attorney, but we don't have one. Be careful. I sat on a soft chair, watching the currency exchange rates on the screen and thinking how strange it was. After a person's death, their money begins to live, more viciously than they did, and more carefully than love. That evening, my cousin Lita called. "Marin, why are you doing this? You're a sensible woman. Just sign everything, and you'll have peace." "Whose peace?" I asked. She fell silent. "Ours," she said. "There's your answer," I replied and hung up. It turns out we all love sudden peace, but only when it's for us. With each passing day, the losses became more tangible. I tried calling my grandchildren. The number was unavailable. In the stairwell, 2 neighbors would fall silent as I approached. "That's her from the video." I became a pariah in my own building, but when someone wrote "greedy" on my door, Margarita carefully wiped the inscription away and taped a paper heart to the door with the words, "Marina." The kettle's on. That little heart held on with tape better than many of my previous agreements had. Then the war of small things began. Ilya sent an official list of funeral expenses and his share of participation. A round sum. I transferred exactly half and attached a receipt. "You're ruining us," he wrote. "I'm paying for my part," I replied. Yulia sent a photo of the grandkids in their winter coats and asked, "We need money for their club activities." I called her. "Can I take them myself and pay for it in person?" The response was silence. Later that evening, she texted, "Don't bother. Silence can be louder than money," but allies appeared too. Anya, the realtor, stuck by me, not begrudging her time. "I've heard them devalue you. Don't give up." Pavel introduced me to a lawyer named Natalia, quiet and very precise. Natalia brought a thin folder. "Here are sample replies to letters. Here's a plan of action if they get hysterical. And here are numbers to call if the pressure gets out of hand." I put the folder on the shelf next to my cookbooks and thought that this was also a recipe. A recipe for how not to get burned. And still, blow followed blow. One day, a notification came. An inspection of the funeral arrangements has been scheduled. Someone had filed a complaint. I sat in the district administration corridor with women whose addresses smelled of villages. They talked about wreaths and certificates, and I held a bag with black tights on my lap, just in case. The specialist looked up. "No violations found." The certificate was white in my hands like snow in a sunlit wind. I walked out and stood by the door for a long time, collecting my breath. And then I snapped. I called Ilya. "Enough," I said. "You won't get control over my life. Period." He was silent. Then quietly, "You chose money." "I chose myself," I replied. On the other end, a short chuckle. "You chose yourself for the last time 20 years ago when you bought those stupid sandals, remember?" I remembered. They were red, and I wore them at home so he wouldn't see. "Now I'm going to wear them outside," I said and hung up. The next day, I went back to the showings. Couples came and went. One woman, around 50, looked around and suddenly said, "This place smells of care." I hadn't expected to hear that word with my nose. We went out onto the balcony, the wind beating against the railing like a bird. She took out a deposit. "I'm on my own, and I want my own place." I took the envelope, and both our hands were trembling, not from fear, but from respect for the moment. When I got home, they were already waiting for me. Artyom was sitting on the windowsill in the hallway. "Can we talk?" We went to the kitchen. He stared at a single spot for a long time, the kettle mark that wouldn't come off. "I'm at fault," he said quietly. "And not just with you. But you understand this isn't just about me. We got used to you being like air. You don't ask air for permission." This honesty hit me harder than any accusation. "Air runs out too," I replied. "And then people learn how to breathe." He nodded, but then still said the familiar phrase, "But you could have." "I couldn't," I said. After he left, I sat in the dark for a long time, like a fish in an aquarium. Everything around me was familiar, but the water was different. I put on my coat and went down to Margarita's. She was already boiling water in her special pot. We drank silently. "They're afraid of you," she said finally, "because you're no longer convenient." "I don't want them to be afraid of me," I said. "They're not afraid of you," she replied. "They're afraid of their own reflections." That evening, I got a letter from an unfamiliar woman. I saw the video. My husband just shrugged and said, "What a witch," but I cried. Thank you. I realized that all around me there was an invisible queue of women who had held hot things for years and never burned anyone but themselves, and that if I gave up, they would hide again. I lay down but couldn't sleep. At 4 in the morning, a new notification arrived. You've been added to the chat. Let's settle everything without court. The admin was Ilya's number. I pressed leave chat. A minute later, the phone rang. What are you doing? Breathing, I replied. The next morning, I met Natalia, the lawyer. We sat by the window. A street cleaner was scraping outside. Natalia said, "Sometimes winning is just enduring, not knowing what tomorrow will bring. Let's go over the plan again." We did. It was like rehearsing a play where I had been an extra for 20 years. Now I had a role, and the lines were 2 words, no and yes. No to the pressure, yes to myself. That evening, Anya texted me. "The buyer wants to meet. She says she wants to say a few words to you in person." I looked at the date on the calendar, stretched my fingers like a pianist before a difficult passage, and replied, "Okay." I didn't know what she would say, but I knew one thing. The old me would have gone to the meeting to be liked. The new me would go to listen. I arrived early for the meeting with the buyer and ordered tea in a glass holder, the kind from my childhood where the metal burned my fingers. The cafe smelled of vanilla and wet hats. The woman was 5 minutes late. She wore a gray coat with a modest swan brooch. "I'm Lena," she introduced herself. "A music teacher. Do you mind if I say something that's not about square footage?" I nodded. "I heard a silence in that apartment," she said, smiling. "It's rare for silence to sound so soft. I'd love this to be a place where women can gather and learn to speak. Well, at least, to name the price of their own labor, I've been giving private lessons for 10 years and I still blush every time I say the fee." I laughed, not loudly, but a soft release of air. "Then you've come to the right place," I replied. "I'm still learning too." We agreed on the deposit and the date of the sale, and that same evening I called Pavel. "I want you and Natalia to be at the signing, and the sons, if they come. But with a condition." "What's the condition?" "They have to sign a waiver of additional claims and a debt repayment schedule for Sansanish as a separate document. Otherwise, I'll file a lawsuit first. Not for a fight. For clarity." He sighed into the phone as if taking off a heavy scarf. "We'll do it." The day of the sale was clear and frosty. The asphalt glistened like polished linoleum. I put on my graphite suit and a thin sweater to match the leather folder. My hair was pulled back in a bun, and the pearl earrings glimmered modestly, just enough to remind me who I was. Everyone gathered at the notary's office: Lena, Anya the realtor, Pavel, and Natalia. Ilya and Artyom came in with their wives, their faces expressionless, their black coats, and the scent of expensive perfume that sometimes masks fear. "We just came to watch," Ilya said without looking at me. "It's still a family matter." "Family is when you don't hide behind someone else's signature," Natalia replied calmly. "You can be present. You cannot interfere." Pavel laid out the documents. A metal ruler drew lines on the paper, like a buffer zone between what has always been and what will be different now. "Before we sign," I said, "one moment." I took a letter from my folder, the one Pavel had given me in an envelope, which we had never discussed aloud. Natalia nodded. It wasn't legally required, but it was morally necessary. I unfolded the page. The paper smelled of tobacco and mint. "Marina," I read aloud, "if they forget who you are, remind them with my hand. If they start pressuring you, Don't give in. They're not malicious, they're just accustomed. But being accustomed is no excuse. And separately, Artyom owes a sum to Sanich. I ask that you have him repay it. If it doesn't work out, don't take it on yourself." I didn't finish reading. The words had already done their work. In the office, the only sound was the clock ticking above the safe, indifferently, like time ticking for those who are used to taking. Ilya blinked rapidly, as if dust had gotten in his eyes. "That's manipulation," he said hoarsely. "Anyone can write anything when a person is dying. They don't write anything." I interrupted calmly. "They write briefly and with the truth. You know that." Pavel slid the main contract toward me. I signed. The pen scratched against the thick paper, as if tracing a path from which I would never turn back. Lena signed with her light, almost musical signature. Then came the deed of transfer, the receipt, the bank transfers. The money went where it was supposed to. "Now, the addendum," Natalia said, placing that very sheet on the table. "A waiver of claims and the debt repayment schedule for Sanich." Artyom went pale. For the first time, I saw in him the boy who had broken a window and was frozen not by fear of punishment, but by the shame of glass that couldn't be put back together. "This is pressure," Yulia whispered. "These are boundaries," I replied. Ilya reached for the pen and stopped again, looking at me as if asking for permission to live like an adult. I said nothing. He took the pen. His signature was shaky and uneven. Artyom signed after him, clenching his teeth so hard his jaw went white. "Thank you," Pavel said and gathered the papers. "The legal part is done." I stood up. My soul felt quiet, like a church after the service. Not empty, but light. Outside, the frost nipped at our eyelashes. Lena pulled her hat down. "Can I say something strange?" she asked. "You just performed a concert on a single chord." "No." It was a complex chord, and a beautiful one. We laughed, and the laughter was as fragile as ice on a puddle. And just as solid. The next day, I opened a bank account for a small program. Not a foundation. I left the grand words to those who like plaques. I simply called it the linen napkin, because sometimes you need to cover a wound with clean cloth to stop the bleeding. I put a sum in it that gave me a pang in my gut, not from self-pity, but from respect for the step I was taking. Anya printed flyers for a meeting. The girls at the local library let me use their room on Wednesdays. Just bring tea. Our kettle is a bit temperamental. The first meeting was strange and wonderful. Women came in, cautiously placing their bags on chairs along the wall, adjusting their hair ties, as if to check if their heads were ready to handle someone else's opinion. Some cried silently, others spoke quickly and a lot, as if afraid the words would run out. We wrote the prices for our work on slips of paper. Manicures, babysitting, tutoring, cleaning, custom pies, and practiced saying them out loud without apology. I heard my own price. The right to exist. It had no market value, but it had cost me my life. At the third meeting, the doors swung open. Yulia and Sveta walked in identical coats, like a uniform. Yulia sat in the front row, crossed her arms, and began, "You destroyed our family. You made us a laughingstock. You're dragging strangers into a private matter." "Why?" I stood up. My knees were wobbly, not from fear, but from responsibility. "I've closed the faucet you were used to drinking from," I said, "and I've opened a window. If you feel a draft, put on a sweater." Someone in the room snickered. Another sighed. Yulia's face flushed. "You speak so pompously," she hissed. "But what have you done for your grandchildren?" I've stopped teaching them to be silent when they're in pain, I replied. That's worth more than a new jacket. From the back, a small, gray-haired woman stood up and said quietly, "Sweetie, I was silent my whole life. I silently did laundry, silently endured. My grandchildren have grown up not knowing what no means. Let someone, anyone, tell them." Yulia's eyes dropped for a second. Then she stood up and left. Sveta followed. The door slammed the way doors do in movies, dramatically and pointlessly. Events, as fate had promised, began to pile up on their own. Ilya's employer, a respectable company, sent a dry letter. "Given the reputational risks, our collaboration has been terminated." I felt no triumph. My chest was warm and heavy, like bread in the oven. Consequences don't smell of caramel revenge, but of the yeast of adult responsibility. Artyom lost 2 clients. A third was late with a payment, and a fourth texted, "Let's take a break." For a while, Yulia sent me long messages with photos of the grandkids, the captions sounding like they were from a magazine. "They need a stable home base." I replied with the same thing. "I am not a home base. I am a person. Boundaries are also a form of love." Sansanich called and said awkwardly, "Marina, I know I didn't ask, but what you made them sign was right. I'm an old man now. I don't know how to convince people." "Thank you." "Don't thank me," I replied. "He and I came up with this together. I just saw it through." I finally allowed myself to move. I found a small, bright apartment on the edge of town, where the morning smelled of water and fresh bread from the bakery on the first floor. I moved 3 boxes, his notebooks, my books, a bowl for the cat I'd decided to get sometime later. Later came that same day. A gray, striped rascal was rubbing against my legs by the entrance, looking as if he had known my address for a long time. "Come on," I said. "You'll be Paulushka." He walked in like he owned the place. Upstairs, in the new apartment, a stranger's clock ticked, and I wasn't bothered by the sound that someone else had sliced out of time. I turned off the extra lights, turned on a lamp, made some tea, and took out the linen napkin sheet from my envelope, the plan for my monthly meetings. Wednesdays at the library, and every other Saturday, a small workshop at Lena's apartment. She had arranged with her neighbors that no one would complain about the female noises. A few weeks passed, and one evening there was a knock on the door. Ilya and Artyom were standing there, without their wives, without bags, looking lost as if they had misplaced the key to their old life. "Can we come in?" Ilya asked. "We want to talk." They sat in the kitchen. Paulushka walked between the chairs, rubbed against Artyom's pants, and Artyom instinctively petted him. "I wanted to apologize," Ilya said. "For the funeral. For everything. He swallowed. "I really thought that's how it was supposed to be, that you always endured." "I'm not made of steel," I said. "I'm water, and water knows how to change its course." "We got used to it," Artyom admitted. "Like electricity. You flip a switch, and it works. You always negotiated, rescued, put out fires. We use that terribly. I did. More than anyone." He took out an envelope. I tensed up. But there was no document or bill inside, just 3 dirty plum-colored bills and a small piece of paper. "The first payment," he said, "according to Sanich's schedule. I took on a side job. I'll be moving furniture until I've settled the debts." I nodded. In my chest, there was no triumph, just a tired, quiet thank you to the world. And also, Ilya looked out the window. "We want to see the kids, but not through money. Without conditions. If you're willing." "I am," I said, "but with one rule: no talk about shares, contributions, or proper behavior. I'm a grandma, not the Department of Finance. We had tea. They left late, and after I closed the door behind them, I didn't cry for the first time in a long time. I even smiled a little. Palushka jumped onto the windowsill, gave me his mocking, "Well, boss, look," and I replied, "Yes, I am." In the spring, when the puddles became round mirrors, we held an open evening for The Linen Napkin at the library. Lena set up records on the tables and a small record player, and between the stories we listened to Bach, like jam between bitter pills. Many people came, women with fine scars in their voices, a few men, cautious but attentive. Natalia talked about legal mechanisms, the librarian brought a pie, Margarita brought her special coffee pot. Yulia peeked through the doorway, alone. I saw her standing there, as if arguing with herself, to go in or to leave. The room, filled with other people's pain, didn't notice her right away. I walked over. "Come in," I said. "The tea is over there. The listening is here." She smiled guiltily and sat down at the back. After the meeting, she came up and said, "I yelled at my son yesterday for a bad grade, and suddenly I heard my own voice. It was yours. It scared me. I don't want to be you." "You don't have to," I replied. "Just be yourself, without the yelling." She nodded. Then, embarrassed, she held out a bag. "Here. These are peace-offering muffins." We both laughed quietly, as if afraid to startle the fragility of the truce. The world around me wasn't changing with a snap of the fingers, but like a body recovering from an illness, slowly, creakily, but surely. I got up early, made oatmeal with milk, sliced an apple into thin wedges, and listened to the radio without the news. Once a week, I went to Lena's. It smelled of old parquet wood and the fresh melodies of her lessons. Every 2 weeks, I walked with my grandchildren in the park, without blackmail, without photos, for a report, just them and the pigeons who never have to account for their love. Sometimes we were silent the way their grandfather and I were silent on the porch. Truly, together. The son still stumbled. Ilya once snapped at me over the phone, "You ruined," and then stopped himself. "I'm sorry. I'm tired." "Me too," I said. We fell silent, but not with hostility. One day, Lena suggested, "Let's have a price lesson for teenagers, so they don't grow up into people for whom mom is a universal okay button." We did it. Kids with slouchy hats came, with a rebellious defiance in their thin pants. I stood before them and said, "When you say mom, remember, she's not a service. She's a person. Start with thank you. It's cheaper than you think." They scoffed. A few rolled their eyes. But after the lesson, 3 of them came up and asked, "How do you know where the boundary is?" We drew a circle on a piece of paper and wrote words inside. Sleep, food, time, friends. I looked at that circle and realized, before, it only had one item. Everyone else. Now, it was different. The resolution happened where I least expected it, in the kitchen. Artyom came over one evening alone, sat down, and folded his hands on the table. "I've been thinking," he said. "You were always like a kettle. You put it on, and it boils. I got used to it. We all got used to it. I want to learn to boil water myself." "Start with the water," I said, "with pouring it into yourself, not just demanding it from others." He nodded. He took a small piece of paper from his pocket. The last payment to Sanich. It settled. I took the paper. It was thin, like the skin on a wrist. I stroked the corner and suddenly understood. I no longer needed to keep a linen napkin ready. The wound had healed. The scar would remain, like a map showing me where I was now. We had a cup of tea. He left, and I opened the window. The night entered the room without asking, and it was right. Some things have the right to enter without knocking. The wind, music, a new life. I took the saucer and put the earrings on it, just as I had that day after the wake. They clinked, and the sound was no longer about loss, but about memory. Pavlushka jumped onto the windowsill and settled down as if he had found his place forever. I wrote a phrase on a piece of paper and stuck it to the refrigerator, the same one he had once written. "Marina, don't forget about yourself." And I added with my own hand, "I remember." How did my world change? It narrowed to the size of my responsibilities and expanded to the size of my breath. It now included women who for the first time said, "I'm in pain," and didn't die of shame. It included men who for the first time said, "I don't know how," and didn't fall apart from weakness. My sons learned to come without demands, and my grandchildren to leave without conditions. Yulia and Sveta are still trying. Sometimes they relapse, sometimes they return to their old tones, but they are finally hearing themselves. And that is what's most important. What did I learn? To listen, not just to them, to myself, to distinguish between a request and manipulation, care and control, love and convenience, to say no, not to walls, but to people, and not out of anger, but out of respect for myself and for them. To ask for help, not because I'm weak, but because a strong person can share the weight. And the ending wasn't a firework show. It was warm tea in the kitchen and a quiet cat on the windowsill. It was the chime of an earring against porcelain, in time with my heart. It was the chance to hug my son not as a debtor or an enemy, but as a person who was once a boy with scraped knees. It was a walk with my grandchildren without taking pictures for a report and without receipts for love. It was me at the helm of my own life, without passengers on my shoulders. Only then did I finally understand. True strength lies in the right to be yourself, and even a touch of sadness isn't an enemy, but the salt that brings flavor back to simple things, to bread, to silence, to my own name, which I can now say without a whisper.